So I want to move on to a topic I'd love to hear your opinion on. I've watched a lot of interviews of Peter Hitchens, and I know you
Yeah,
probably know who he is. And he's very critical of the position of many governments to legalize marijuana, especially in the
yeah,
UK. And his argument in one of the interviews was that it leads to violence, that those who smoke pots, I mean, he cited an example of a student or a child that killed his parents in the UK, and this child said it was because of marijuana. So, what would your opinion of his stance be, and what would be the libertarian response be to his argument?
Okay. I actually debated Peter Hitchens once at Exeter University. It was one of my not an experience I look back with fondness because I lost the debate actually. The motion was that this house would legalise marijuana, and Peter won the debate by arguing that marijuana legalization was a conspiracy by wicked big companies to have another product to flog to people, and he knew his audience. That got him a win. Um, if you think about the particulars of it, the idea that marijuana leads to violence is, on the face of it, ridiculous because, as anyone who's smoked dope knows, that what it actually does is make you incredibly chilled and, like, not interested in doing anything apart from, talking rubbish basically and just lying around like an idiot. Other stuff, angel dust or cocaine, yes, makes you manic and aggressive. However, this is where to give Peter some credit. There is very, very strong evidence that if you already have a predisposition to schizophrenia, then smoking marijuana, particularly between the ages of roughly about 14 and mid-20s or so, is likely to trigger the schizophrenia. Most schizophrenia normally presents in the early to mid-20s. And if you what you find is that you'll have a kind of genetic predisposition to schizophrenia, and that if you smoke marijuana, you are much more likely for that predisposition to actually manifest, and it'll present as full-blown schizophrenia. And of course, schizophrenics can then commit violent acts because the voices in their head have told them to do it or something like that. I think it is true that certainly, well, there's two statistics, both of which are true. Marijuana increases the chances of your getting schizophrenia significantly. The overwhelming majority of people who smoke marijuana will suffer no adverse health effects whatsoever. The basic rule of thumb is if you have a close relative, which means anything up to a cousin, who has had a schizophrenic episode, you should never think of smoking marijuana. It's just really risky for you. At least you shouldn't start smoking until you reach 30. It seems with that illness, if it doesn't manifest by that age, then it's quite unlikely to manifest. So basically, there is a high health risk, but it's very, very clearly identifiable. Now, the conclusion he draws is that therefore you should ban it and you should send people who smoke marijuana to prison. And I think this is a ludicrous answer. And never mind about a libertarian position, it's a ludicrous answer on straightforward utilitarian rational policy grounds. Because what it does is it means that you're going to enrich a whole lot of people, criminals. You are going to mean that because of the incentives those criminals face, they are going to constantly look to ramp up the strength of their product. So prohibition of marijuana is what has led to the development of ever stronger forms of marijuana and varieties of the product. So the kind of dope people were smoking back in the summer of love in the 60s was nowhere near as potent, as powerful as the kind of skunk that's being consumed these days. But that's a product of prohibition. In the United States, the 1920s, prohibition turned America from being a nation of beer drinkers into a nation of hard liquor drinkers for the same reason. It just doesn't work that way. But also it means that the kind of health advice I just gave in my own way is not available, because you can't really give people health advice about how to use an illegal product. It doesn't work that way. Plus, of course, it's completely ineffective. That's biggest failure ever. I mean, Peter Hitchens thinks it's because we haven't locked up enough people. But I mean, the reality is that there's a widespread demand for this product. And unless you're going to lock up literally about a third of the population in many parts of countries, you're not going to be able to get rid of that demand. And the people are going to meet that supply to that demand. So what should you do? Well, I think the answer is, I don't think necessarily that smoking dope is good for you, particularly not if you smoke heavily and consistently, it does have pretty adverse effects, I think, in terms not of illness or schizophrenia or violence, but in terms of just basically making you not fit to work a lot of the time. So the same as a drink problem would affect you that way. So what I think you need to think of is, what is the best way of reducing, if you're a libertarian, something that you think as a libertarian people should have the right to do? Because the libertarian position is that this is a matter of personal autonomy. It's the John Stuart Mill view. You know, if you want to do something, even if it's bad for you, other people have no right to stop you. So if you would take that libertarian point, how do you deal with a product which is, you know, still maybe not something you want to see widely used? Well, I think the answer is to look at the way temperance worked in the 19th century. You have a kind of voluntary social movement to try and discourage people from doing it. And we can see how this has worked with all kinds of things. You know, there's people have changed their dietary choices massively in the last 30 or 40 years, not because the government has done anything, but because there are tons of people going to diet clubs and so on. And I think that's the way to do it. So that's even if you were to accept Peter's argument that there's some serious risks, which I think is massively overstated, there isn't the risk he describes. The solution he advocates, that of prohibition, is completely the wrong one. It's just totally wrong-headed.
Yeah, and with my limited personal experience of marijuana, I can testify that it's almost impossible to contemplate murdering anyone.
You're totally spaced out. I mean, having observed what it's like, not done it myself, I can say that cocaine users, on the other hand, I would not be surprised if they're more likely to assault somebody, because that makes you into a total, self-obsessed manic idiot, basically.
But I think you would agree with this comment that the main reason why states want to legalize marijuana is not because of some good intentions. It's because they want to tax marijuana
absolutely
as a sin tax, and they can make a lot of money like they make from alcohol or sugar by taxing marijuana. That's why I want to legalize marijuana.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very much the case. And you can see this in the United States, where it's become a major revenue source for states like Colorado. And American states are typically on the uppers financially, so they're desperate to do this. And that's why I think ultimately it's going to get through. By the way, it works the other way in reverse. Why did we get prohibition in the United States in 1921, despite the fact that there'd been a huge temperance movement in the US for decades before then? Well, it's because until 1913, the US federal government got a lot of its money from taxes on alcohol. So they couldn't afford to make it illegal. Then in 1913, they passed the amendment to the Constitution that allowed an income tax. And as a result, they suddenly had oodles of money, and they didn't need the alcohol tax so much. And that was enough to tick a critical number of people in Congress from one side to the other to pass the constitutional amendment that outlawed alcohol. So it works in both directions. In that case, it was the lack of need for the tax on the product, alcohol in that case, that led to its prohibition. So it's working the other way around now with marijuana.